Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? Alexandra Reynolds sat among a sea of uniforms and insignia, the hum of fluorescent lights blending with the scratch of pencils and the low murmur of senior officers. Maps lined the screens, topography, movement, radio intercepts, but no one looked at her. Not yet. To them, she was just an analyst, a paper soldier in a world of warriors. But they had no idea. She leaned forward slightly, the glow of the monitor reflecting off her tired eyes. 3 nights without sleep, parsing satellite data, intercept logs, and cross-border heat signatures. And now the pattern was there, hidden like a scar beneath the surface. Colonel Harris entered without a word, his posture rigid as steel. His gaze moved over the room, dismissing everyone except her. Making progress, Reynolds. She straightened instinctively. Yes, sir, I believe I've identified a pattern. Harris raised a brow. You've been pushing this theory for weeks. Show me something concrete. Alex pulled up the data she'd stitched together like threads of a broken web. 3 separate armory thefts, Arizona, El Paso, and Sierra Vista. Same pattern. High-yield explosives, detonation tech, encrypted comms, and all connected by movement near the border. Harris leaned closer to the screen. What's the connection? Alex zoomed in on a red marker. Intercepted chatter mentioned something called Phoenix, and a name, Condor. They said, the Condor will not stop us this time. The colonel's jaw tightened. Condor, what's the reference? She hesitated. I'm not certain, sir, but I've requested access to historical CIA files, Cold War era, Afghanistan operations. My father served in those theaters. Before he died, he mentioned something called Operation Condor. That name hung in the air like smoke. Harris exhaled through his nose, silent for a long moment. Your father was a good man, he said quietly, but chasing ghosts won't help us. Focus on actionable intel. If Phoenix is planning something, I need where and when. Yes, sir. When he left, the silence returned, but it felt heavier now. Ghosts had been mentioned, and ghosts always came back. Alex stared at the monitor long after the door shut. Her father's voice came unbidden, deep, calm, the same tone he used when teaching her to shoot tin cans behind their Kentucky ranch. Patterns are people, Alex. Learn how they think, and you'll see what they'll do before they do it. She'd spent her life doing exactly that. A secure chime pulled her from memory. A message appeared. Your request has drawn attention. Be careful who you trust. No signature, no sender, just a file number. Her pulse spiked. She hesitated only for a second, then began to work. Bypassing the clearance firewall wasn't easy, but her father had taught her that some rules were built to keep the wrong people safe. The file opened. Operation Condor Top Secret. She scrolled, eyes narrowing as the story unfolded. A covert CIA mission during the Soviet-Afghan War, led by her father, Captain James Reynolds. His objective, eliminate a Soviet-backed warlord turned American asset. But it had gone wrong, horribly wrong. Her eyes froze on a photo buried in the file, her father standing beside 2 men. One was a younger version of Senator Victor Harmon, now a presidential candidate. The other, Phoenix Omar Rahman. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The same Phoenix mentioned in the intercepted messages. The same network she'd been tracking. She whispered under her breath, "What the hell were you involved in, Dad?" Before she could read further, a system warning flashed, access being monitored. She yanked the drive from the terminal, wiped her trail, and shut everything down. But the weight of what she'd seen clung to her like sand after a storm. That night, her apartment was silent except for the faint hum of her old laptop. The lights from Fort Bragg glowed distantly through her blinds. She loaded the files onto an air-gapped system, her father's photo framed beside it. He'd been gone 10 years. Helicopter crash, they said. Routine training accident. Except her father had never believed in accidents. Her phone rang, unknown number. She hesitated, thumb hovering, then answered. Reynolds. The voice was old, rough, the kind of rasp that came from a lifetime of smoke and secrets. You need to stop digging. Her muscles tensed. Who is this? Someone who knew your father. Someone who knows what you're about to uncover. Her stomach dropped. How did you get this number? The same way you got those files. Listen carefully, Alexandra. Operation Condor didn't end in the 80s. It never ended. And the same people who killed your father are coming for you. Her throat went dry. My father died in a crash. A bitter laugh. Is that what they told you? Ask yourself why a man who survived 20 combat missions would die in a training accident. Your father was murdered because he found out what Phoenix really was. Who are you? She demanded. William Jackson, your father called me Bull. We served together in Delta. If you want the truth, meet me tomorrow. Mall's Diner, Highway 87, 700. Come alone. The line went dead. Alex sat in silence, the steady pulse of her heart suddenly louder than the world outside. She knew the name. Her father had spoken of Bull Jackson like a legend, the man who once carried him 5 miles under fire in Kandahar. She barely slept. When dawn came, she was already on the road, her father's 1911 pistol in the glove compartment and a photograph tucked into her jacket, the one of them on the range when she was 12. Mall's Diner was a relic, sun-faded photos, old soldiers' patches on the wall, the smell of burned coffee and oil. She sat in the parking lot for a full 10 minutes before going in, scanning every car, every reflection in the glass. The man was already there. Late 60s, broad-shouldered even with age, cap pulled low, special forces insignia worn to thread. He sat with his back to the wall, eyes tracking everything. She approached cautiously. William Jackson. He looked up and for a brief second his expression softened. Christ, you look just like him. She sat. You said my father was murdered. He poured coffee from the carafe, motioned to her cup. He was, and you're about to understand why. His hands were calloused, his knuckles scarred but steady. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of memory and guilt. Your father found proof that Phoenix, Omar Rahman, wasn't terminated like the CIA claimed. He was protected, funded, for decades. He had dirt on powerful people, people like Victor Harmon. The senator, she whispered. The same. Back then he was a CIA field officer running ops in Afghanistan. When the Soviets fell, Harmon kept Rahman alive, used him as a weapon, but your father found out. He was going to expose it. Her throat tightened, so they killed him. Jackson nodded slowly. Helicopter didn't go down by accident. I warned him to stop. He said if anything happened, I was to look after you. He leaned closer. And now you're in the same crosshairs. Alex fought to steady her voice. You said the operation never ended. Phoenix is back, operating here, on U.S. soil. They've been rebuilding networks, stockpiling weapons, and Harmon, about to become president. If that happens, the whole machine goes dark forever. Alex felt the ground shift beneath her. Her father's ghost wasn't a memory anymore. It was a mission. She stared out the diner window. A pair of uniformed soldiers laughed near the entrance, unaware that a shadow war was being waged right under their noses. What do I do? She finally asked. Jackson reached into his jacket and slid a small, encrypted comlink across the table. You don't trust anyone in the chain of command. Not yet. Use this if things go bad. She pocketed it, her pulse steadying with resolve. You said they're planning something. Jackson's eyes darkened. Something that'll shake this country to its core. A false flag operation to secure Harmon's election. They'll stage a terrorist attack on U.S. soil and make him the hero who stops it. Her breath caught, and Phoenix will deliver the chaos he needs. Alex's mind raced. She could feel her father's lessons resurfacing. Trust no one. analyze everything, move before they move you. Her phone buzzed on the table. Call, HARRIS priority assignment. She showed it to Jackson. He frowned. Be careful. This could be their move to isolate you. Or it could be legitimate. Doesn't matter. They're watching now, every call, every order. She stood. Then I'll play along. He caught her wrist, his grip firm but not unkind. Your father trained you for this, not just to survive, to finish what he couldn't. Their eyes met. For the first time since the ambush of her childhood, since the folded flag at her father's funeral, she felt that old steel rising again. When she walked out into the daylight, the world looked different, sharper, every face a possible enemy, every silence a threat. She didn't know it yet, but in 3 days the desert would burn, and the world would think Staff Sergeant Alexandra Reynolds was dead. They would cheer her death. And that's when her real mission would begin. She stood at attention in Colonel Harris's office, sunlight cutting across the blinds like bars on a cage. Sit down, Reynolds. He slid a folder across the desk, classified markings, crimson seal, high-value witness, code name Nomad. He claims to have information on the Phoenix group. You'll accompany the security detail for transport and debrief. Alex kept her tone even. Why me? He specifically asked for the analyst tracking Phoenix communications. Harris's eyes were unreadable. Apparently your works impress people in places you can't see. That should have felt like praise. Instead, it felt like exposure. Yes, sir. Captain Rodriguez will lead the convoy. You know him. I do, she said quietly. Her old instructor from intelligence school. A good man. Maybe the last she could still trust. Harris closed the folder. Wheels up in 1 hour, dismissed. When she left the building, the air smelled of rain and exhaust. Somewhere beyond the fences, the Carolina woods whispered in the wind. She'd grown up believing her father's world was one of honor and service. Now she saw its shadows. Her phone buzzed, a single message from an unknown number. Trust your instincts, Bull. She didn't reply. 45 minutes later she was airborne, the roar of the C-130 drowning out the static in her thoughts. Tucson Desert waited below, vast and gold and empty. She stared through the window, fingers tightening around her father's pistol resting inside her duffel. They thought she was just an analyst. They were wrong. When the plane touched down, heat hit her like a furnace. 2 black SUVs idled on the tarmac, dust curling around their tires. Captain David Rodriguez stood beside them, sleeves rolled, calm, deliberate, the kind of man who inspired confidence without saying much. Staff Sergeant Reynolds, he extended a hand. Been a while. Yes, sir, Iraq 2019. Recognition flickered in his eyes. That intel packet you wrote saved 6 Rangers from walking into an IED nest. Glad you're on this run. He motioned toward 4 soldiers forming the detail. We move at 500. Tonight we brief. The safe house was a squat concrete building at the edge of the base, unmarked, silent, smelling faintly of dust and oil. Inside, a familiar voice stopped her in the doorway. Morning, Sergeant. Bull Jackson. He looked different in fatigues again, older, slower maybe, but the same steadiness radiated from him. He nodded once as if to say play along. Rodriguez gestured between them. Reynolds, this is Mr. Jackson, former Delta, consultant on Phoenix operations. Pleasure, she said evenly, though her pulse jumped. The witness, Rodriguez continued, is Amir Zahir, former lieutenant to Omar Rahman. He'll brief us himself once we extract him. Zahir, Jackson repeated, Rahman's shadow for 20 years. Until now, Rodriguez said, claims he's defecting, says Rahman's planning something catastrophic. Alex tried to ignore the sinking weight in her stomach. And Harmon. Rodriguez hesitated then. Orders came through channels linked to his committee, above my pay grade. That was all she needed to know. Later, outside beneath a sky fading from orange to indigo, Jackson joined her by the vehicles. "I didn't expect you here," she said softly. "Rodriguez requested me. We served together in the Gulf. He doesn't know about our call." "Then why take the risk?" He studied the horizon. "Because Zahir's the key. He can tie Raman directly to Harmon, and Harmon to your father's murder." The wind carried the faint smell of sand and jet fuel. "If this goes bad," she asked, "you still trust Rodriguez?" "I trust him to do his duty," Jackson said. "But duty's complicated when the chain of command is poisoned." That night Alex couldn't sleep. The hum of the air conditioner felt like static in her skull. She spread the route maps across her cot, tracing the red line with a penlight. The convoy would leave the base, travel north toward Fort Huachuca, cross through Red Rock Canyon. Her father's voice echoed, "Find the choke points. That's where the story ends or begins." She found it a narrow passage with steep cliffs, no alternate roads, poor comm coverage. Perfect for an ambush. Her gut clenched. Minutes later, she was knocking on Rodriguez's door. He answered instantly, half-dressed, eyes alert. "Sir, I believe our route's compromised." She laid out the map. "Here, Red Rock Canyon, it's a kill box." He studied the lines, jaw tightening. "I know." "You know." "I requested a change earlier today. Denied. Orders from the Pentagon. We stick to the primary route." Her chest went cold. "That makes no sense unless—" "Unless someone wants us vulnerable," he finished. "Exactly." They stared at each other in silence, two soldiers realizing the war they were fighting might not have sides anymore. Finally, he said quietly, "We go anyway, but we'll be ready." He opened a locker, revealing extra magazines, medical kits, a small cache of grenades. "Load up. And Reynolds, whatever happens out there, trust your instincts more than your orders." Dawn came red and merciless. The desert shimmered like molten glass as they assembled. Alex checked her gear one last time, sidearm secure, comlink active, her father's spare 1911 hidden in an ankle holster. Rodriguez gave the final briefing, calm, methodical, the way good leaders mask dread. Zahir waited outside the safe house, flanked by CIA handlers, older than she expected. Trim beard, silver hair, sharp eyes that had seen too much. "You are the analyst," he said with a faint accent, "the one who sees what others miss." Alex kept her tone neutral, "Just part of the team." He smiled thinly. "Modesty is a dangerous virtue. It keeps people alive but never happy." When the convoy rolled out, heat waves rose off the road like ghosts. Two SUVs 50 meters apart. Rodriguez led with two operators. Alex sat in the rear of the second with Zahir, Jackson beside her, Sergeant Wilson driving. For the first hour, nothing but static and dust. Then Zahir spoke, voice calm. "You have questions, Sergeant. Ask them before the canyon." "The canyon." Alex turned slowly toward him. "How did you know our route goes through Red Rock?" His smile was tired, knowing. "Because that is where Raman will strike. His tactics never change. Predictable, almost elegant. You are the bait." Jackson's jaw tightened. "You set this up." "I set the stage. Raman believes he's eliminating a traitor and the woman who discovered him. But he does not know I have already sent evidence to those who can destroy him and Harmon." Alex stared at him, fury rising. "You used us to lure them." "I gave you the same chance your father never had," Zahir said. "A chance to finish this." Her earpiece crackled, Rodriguez's voice steady as ever. "Approaching Red Rock Canyon. All units full alert." Jackson lifted the radio. "Lead vehicle, this is 2. Route compromised. Recommend immediate deviation." Rodriguez's reply came back clipped. "Negative. New orders proceed as planned. Authorization code Lima Charlie." Alex froze. Lima Charlie. That code could only come from top command, maybe even Harmon's office. "They're sending us into the trap," she whispered. Zahir closed his eyes. "And now you see the truth." She turned to Wilson. "Maintain distance. If the lead truck goes up, you reverse. Hard." "Yes, ma'am." The road narrowed, canyon walls rising on both sides. Radio signal began to break. Alex felt her heartbeat slow, that strange stillness her father used to call the calm before clarity. And then light. A flash so bright it seemed to tear the air apart. The lead SUV disintegrated in a wall of fire. The shockwave hit their vehicle a second later, throwing it sideways. Wilson fought the wheel, tires shrieking. "Reverse now." He slammed it into gear. But a second explosion behind them sealed the exit, boulders crashing onto the road, dust turning daylight into fog. Automatic fire erupted from the cliffs, tracer rounds cutting orange arcs through the haze. "Out, out," Jackson barked, already moving. Bullets chewed into the metal as they spilled out, taking cover behind the smoking SUV. Alex dragged Zahir by his jacket, forcing him down behind a rock. Wilson, suppressing fire, East Ridge. Rounds cracked overhead. Wilson returned short bursts, precise and disciplined, buying them seconds. Rodriguez's vehicle was gone, just flames and twisted metal. The men inside, no chance. Her mind detached, soldier mode taking over. Count targets, identify angles, move on instinct. 8 fighters at least, high ground both sides. Coordinated fire. Jackson crouched beside her, voice calm even now. "We can't stay here, they'll flank." "There, that boulder cluster, 20 meters west side, better cover." "On your go." Wilson covering fire, 2 count. He nodded, popped from cover, unleashed controlled bursts. The 3 of them sprinted low through the smoke, rocks exploding around their feet. Alex hit the ground hard behind the boulders, lungs burning. She checked Zahir, shaken but alive. "Wilson." "Here," he gasped, sliding in beside them, blood streaking his temple. They were boxed in. No comms, minimal ammo, 1 med kit. "We need extraction," Wilson said, grabbing for the radio. "No," Alex stopped him. "Command's compromised. If we call for help, we'll just paint a target." Jackson nodded grimly. "They'll triangulate the signal. We're on our own." A bullet pinged off the rock inches from her face. She forced her breathing steady. "Then we change the game," she said quietly. "How?" Wilson demanded. She met his eyes. "We hunt the hunters." Gunfire intensified. She spotted movement on the ridge, silhouettes advancing, confident, thinking their prey was pinned. "Wilson, flares and spare ammo. Use them to make noise east side. Make it look like reinforcements." He blinked, understanding dawning. "Create confusion." Jackson gave a short nod. She's her father's daughter. While Wilson prepared the distraction, Alex checked her sidearm, feeling the slick metal warm in her palm. The same weapon her father had carried. "Once the flares go, we climb the west ridge," she told Jackson. "They won't expect us to go up." "You up for that?" he asked, half smiling through blood on his cheek. "Not an option." 10 seconds later, red light ignited the sky, flares screaming upward, followed by a small explosion from the ammo cache. The ambushers turned instinctively toward the noise. "Now." They moved, low, fast, silent. Years of training came alive in her body, muscle memory forged in endless drills, with her father's calm voice correcting every mistake. "Don't think. Feel the terrain. Become it." Halfway up, loose gravel betrayed her. A rock tumbled. A fighter looked over the edge. Before he could shout, Jackson's knife flashed, 1 clean strike, silent, efficient. The man toppled soundlessly. At the ridge top, 2 more targets. Alex was already moving, 3 rounds, each one placed where it counted. She didn't feel the recoil, only the cold focus. Silence, then the sudden stillness that meant victory or the next wave. Below, she saw the ambushers, pattern collapse. Wilson's diversion had drawn half of them away. Jackson pointed downslope. 4 left, moving on Wilson. I'll take the east flank. He shook his head. I've got it. Bill. 4 against 1. I've seen worse odds. Their eyes met, the unspoken understanding of soldiers who knew how these stories usually ended. See you at the bottom, he said, and was gone. Alex circled along the ridge, catching the remaining gunmen from behind. The first went down with a whisper, the second with a thunderclap. A stray round grazed her arm, hot, sharp, but she didn't stop. When the final echo died, the canyon was still again, filled only with smoke and the faint crackle of burning metal. Wilson stumbled out from cover wide-eyed. They're all down. Zahir rose slowly, eyes haunted. Your father would have been proud. Alex wiped blood from her face, breathing hard. We're not done. She looked at the wreckage of the lead vehicle. Nothing left but fire and memory. Rodriguez, she whispered, we'll make this right. Jackson joined her, limping, face gray with exhaustion but alive. He rested a hand on her shoulder. They thought this was a clean kill, he said. They'll report us dead before nightfall. She met his gaze. Good. He frowned slightly. If they think I'm dead, she said, voice low and certain, I can do what my father never could. She turned toward the horizon, desert heat, shimmering over endless miles of sand and silence. Now, she said, we hunt. Night fell hard over the desert. Wind whispered through the shattered canyon, carrying the smell of cordite and blood. The fire from the wreckage flickered weakly now, dying embers of a mission no one was supposed to survive. Alexandra Reynolds stood among the ruins, face streaked with dust and sweat. The desert silence pressed in on her like a weight. Let's move, Jackson said quietly. They'll send recovery teams, drones first, maybe boots on the ground. Wilson knelt by a fallen operative retrieving ammunition. His hands trembled. Sir, Rodriguez, he didn't make it. Alex didn't look, she couldn't. He knew the risk. The words were cold, automatic, but inside something cracked. Rodriguez had believed in her and she'd watched him burn. They gathered what they could, ammo, rations, one working radio. Zahir handed Alex a small metal device no bigger than a thumb drive. This, he said softly, is the truth your father died for. Everything, financial records, communications between Raman and Harmon, even orders for Condor. If I die, you make sure this reaches the light. Alex slipped it into her vest pocket. We all get out together. Jackson met her eyes. We'll need cover and distance. There's a ranger outpost 10 miles south. Radios, supplies, maybe a vehicle. She nodded, then we move. They left the canyon under starlight, 4 shadows moving through a world of sand and bone. Each step was agony, the desert floor still radiating heat from the day. Jackson's limp worsened, blood darkening his pant leg, but he refused to slow. After an hour, Wilson muttered, feels like walking on Mars. Except Mars might be friendlier, Alex said. He gave a weak chuckle. Even in fear, humor kept soldiers human. When they finally saw the outline of the ranger station, a dark shape perched on an outcrop, relief almost hurt. But Alex didn't relax. The quiet was too perfect. She signaled a halt. I'll clear it. The lock gave easily under her hand. Inside, empty. No lights, no sound, a radio on a desk, a cabinet with emergency rations, a first aid kit. Clear, she called softly. Jackson entered last, setting his rifle against the wall and immediately collapsing into a chair. His leg wound had reopened, blood seeping through the bandage. Alex moved to him, already tearing open a field kit. I told you I'm fine, he grumbled. You're not. She cleaned and rebandaged the wound, her hands steady even as exhaustion dragged at her. You've done this before, he said. My father made me practice, she said quietly. He used to say a soldier who can't patch a wound isn't ready to cause one. Jackson gave a pained smile. He taught you well. He taught me to survive. I'm still learning how to live." Zahir settled across from them, the lantern's dim light painting deep lines on his face. "You have your father's eyes," he said softly. "He saw through lies the way others see through smoke." She ignored the compliment, focusing on the bandage. "Why help us, Zahir? You worked with Raman for decades. You killed people like us." He didn't flinch. "Yes, for ideology, for pride, for survival, I justified it many ways, until I watched what we became. Raman lost his cause. Now he sells chaos to men like Harman. And Harman, he's worse than any warlord I ever followed. He believes his lies are patriotism. Silence, the kind that hurts more than noise." Wilson broke it, checking the small radio. "Short range only. Sheriff's department maybe." "No," Alex said immediately. "If we broadcast, they'll find us." Jackson reached into his boot and pulled out an old satellite phone, scratched and scuffed. "This one's mine. Off-grid, secure." He dialed a number by memory. The call connected after 2 rings. "Colonel James Mackenzie," he said. "It's Bull." Alex watched his expression change, tension softening into trust. When he hung up, he said, "He's in Phoenix, runs a private security firm now. Your father saved his life once. He's agreed to meet us at a rendezvous 10 miles east by dawn." Wilson exhaled. Finally, good news. Alex glanced at Jackson's leg. "You need rest before we move." 4 hours, he said, "then we go." They took turns on watch. When her shift came, Alex sat by the window, rifle resting across her knees. The desert spread before her like an ocean of shadows. Her father's voice came back again. "The stars never lie, Alex, even when people do." She found the North Star and tried to breathe. Behind her, Jackson stirred. "Your father used to do that too," he said quietly. "Couldn't sleep before a mission. Said the stars were the only honest coordinates left." Alex turned. His face looked older in the lamplight, worn by guilt more than time. "You knew," she said, "about Harman, about Condor. Why didn't you tell me sooner?" He sighed. "Because your father made me promise not to. He wanted you clear of this mess. A normal life. But when you started digging, I knew he'd rather you had the truth than die blind." "Did he know he was going to be killed?" Jackson nodded slowly. "He called me the night before the crash, said he finally had proof, told me if anything happened it meant Harman had moved, and he told me to find you." Alex swallowed hard. "You watched over me all these years." "From a distance. Your father was my brother. I owed him that much." Something in her chest twisted. Grief and gratitude tangled into something sharper. Before she could speak, Wilson appeared in the doorway, whispering, "Movement outside. Vehicle approaching." Alex killed the lantern instantly. Darkness filled the room. They crouched low, weapons ready. Through the cracked window, headlights wound up the dusty road. "One vehicle," Wilson said. "Markings look official, park ranger." "Could be nothing," Jackson said. "Could be everything," Alex replied. She signaled for the others to stay put and moved to the door, keeping her rifle low but ready. The truck stopped outside. A single ranger stepped out, flashlight cutting through the dark. Alex made a decision. She opened the door first, forcing a smile. "Oh, thank God," she said, pitching her voice to tremble. "Are you responding to our call? My father's diabetic, we were stranded." The ranger blinked in confusion. "Ma'am, what call? This station isn't manned at night." "Please, he's inside, he's fatting fast." His suspicion flickered. His hand drifted toward his sidearm. "I'll need to see ID." Alex smiled again, stepping aside. "Of course, it's in my bag just inside." The moment he stepped past the threshold, her hand moved fast, precise, striking the nerve cluster at his neck. He collapsed soundlessly. "Help me," she whispered. Jackson was already there. They carried the unconscious man to a chair, cuffed him gently, gagged him with a strip of clean bandage. "He'll wake with a headache," Alex said, "but alive." Wilson checked the truck. Full tank, radio works, that's our ride. Then we move before backup checks in, Jackson said. They transferred supplies quickly. The Ranger's truck rattled down the mountain road minutes later, headlights off, moonlight guiding their way. Alex drove, jaw set, eyes forward. Jackson watched her from the passenger seat. "You've done this before," he said. "Driving without headlights." He smiled faintly, operating under pressure. "My father used to make me drive the ranch road in the dark. Said if I could navigate without light, I'd never panic in it." Jackson chuckled softly. James always believed fear was a choice. He just never stopped choosing courage. She kept her gaze on the winding dirt track ahead. "I used to think courage meant not feeling fear. Now I think it's doing what you must while you're shaking." He nodded. "That's the truest kind." The horizon brightened slightly, not sunrise, but the faint glow of civilization. They reached the trading post near 3 a.m., a lonely gas station, a motel, a diner, the kind of place travelers forget but drifters remember. Alex parked a quarter-mile out. "We need a civilian vehicle, something that won't get flagged." She pulled the Ranger's jacket over her fatigues. "I'll go in alone. The uniform gives me leverage." "Be careful," Jackson said. "I always am," she lied. Inside, the clerk barely looked up from his coffee until he saw the badge. "Morning, officer. You're out early." "Chasing 3 suspects," she said, scanning the lot. "You seen any strangers tonight?" He shook his head. "Quiet night." She smiled politely. "Good. I'll need to refuel and grab some supplies. Any vehicles for sale?" He thought for a second. "Old Suburban out front, belongs to Jenkins, cabin 3. Guy lost his license, wants to sell." Alex paid cash for snacks and water, thanked him and left. 10 minutes later, she was knocking on cabin 3. A bleary-eyed man opened the door, squinting against the porch light. "What the hell?" "Ranger service," she interrupted smoothly. "Heard you've got a vehicle for sale." He blinked, then grinned, eager. 15 grand cash, runs perfect." "I'll take a look." Jackson joined her, playing the part of a quiet buyer. They inspected the Suburban, nodded, and promised to return later with payment. By the time Jenkins realized he hadn't asked for a deposit, they were already gone, driving west into the dark. Wilson exhaled. That was way too easy. Alex adjusted the mirrors, merging onto the highway. Sometimes truth is simpler than lies. People see what they expect: uniforms, smiles, authority. My father called it the camouflage of confidence. Zahir stirred in the back seat, voice weary. "You wear it well." Alex didn't answer. Her mind was already elsewhere, on Phoenix, on Harmon, on the storm waiting in the city ahead. They drove in silence, dawn painting the desert in pale gold. Jackson finally spoke. "Mackenzie's expecting us. He'll meet at the Botanical Gardens in Phoenix. Safe, open, public, good cover." Alex nodded. "Public's good. They can't shoot what everyone's watching." Her eyes caught the distant skyline, still faint but growing clearer. "Phoenix," she murmured. "Fitting name for a city built on ashes." Wilson looked at her in the mirror. "You think we can actually stop them?" She didn't answer immediately. The road stretched before them, endless, uncertain. Finally she said, "I don't know, but we can make them afraid again." The wind carried her words out into the desert, dissolving into the rising light. Behind her, the sun climbed higher, a red wound on the horizon, and somewhere far away, men who thought they'd buried her were already celebrating her death. They had no idea she was coming. Who would have believed a garden could hide an army? They met among the cacti and ironwood, the desert botanical garden folding around them like a living map of concealment. Colonel James Mackenzie looked smaller in person, age tucked into his shoulders, but when he stepped forward, the air shifted. Respect followed him like a shadow. He hugged Jackson briefly, then turned to Alex with a look that was both apology and praise. "You look like your father," he said, and for a second the words were dangerous, tender, and true. They moved through the paths in pairs, voices low, eyes always scanning. Mackenzie had brought people who made the air feel different. Thomas Rivera, who moved like he had a dozen lives of practiced violence stored between his ribs. Sarah Chandler, whose fingers flew over a laptop as if she could coax secrets out of the world with code. Michael Diaz, who knew the rhythms of protective details and the way panic spreads in a crowd. They fit together like an old machine coming back to life. "Welcome to the wrong side of the law," Mackenzie joked, then went quiet. "I've been watching Harmon for years, but this is worse than any rumor." Alex watched him watch the skyline. Phoenix, iron and glass and ambition, gleamed at the horizon. He prepared a safe house in Scottsdale, a tidy ranch hidden behind hedges and false faces. By the time they reached it, Chandler had already begun pulling hotel schematics and floor plans onto a bank of monitors in the converted garage. The house smelled faintly of coffee and antiseptic. People who retired into this kind of work never stopped treating danger like a job. "No theatrics," Mackenzie said, laying a finger over the table. "This is clean and precise. We take Raman alive. We bring the device. We hand it to people who can't be bought." Jackson met her eyes, and if they get in the way, his tone was an old promise and a new warning. "Then we do what needs to be done," Alex said, and the words tasted like the dust from the canyon. They set roles like surgeons assigning instruments. Mackenzie and Rivera would secure stairwell access and hold a fallback position. Chandler and Wilson would establish passive surveillance from the room below Raman's suite, a patient camera through the ceiling, acoustic sensors, and a jammer that would be silent until needed. Jackson, Alex, and Diaz would be the entry team, the ones to close the distance and take custody of Raman. Zahir would stay off-site, feeding updates and checking for ripples in the enemy's communications. Mackenzie's private firm would provide 3 trusted operators, eyes and hands if the plan unraveled. "Timing is our life," Chandler said, pressing a stylus to a schematic. "Raman's suite is a corner unit on the 14th floor. Maintenance access from below, service elevator near the staff stairwell. Cameras in the hall, but we can mask line of sight for short windows. If we move at 1200, we catch them mid-rotation, guards less alert, routines relaxed." Alex traced the lines with her finger, memorizing routes the way she used to memorize code strings and intercept windows. This was no longer a spreadsheet. It was a body of water she had to cross without drowning. Her throat tightened. She thought of Rodriguez's burned hands and the faces of the men who'd been killed in the canyon. She could feel their ghosts sitting at the planning table like unpaid consultants. "You have doubts?" Mackenzie asked, but it wasn't a question. It was permission to be honest. "Every single one of them," she said, "but doubt doesn't mean inaction." They rehearsed like a chorus working toward a single breath. Rivera ran point drills for stairwell breaches. Chandler calibrated microphones to pick up the faintest clink of a keycard. Diaz talked through angles of approach and extraction routes, the way a man thinks through the protection of politicians, as if he were rewrapping their deaths in layers of safety. Jackson moved through the plans like a man reading his own bones, offering small, seasoned corrections. "You remember your entry cues," he said to her after a long practice. "Move through shadows. Use silence first. Let noise be your last resort. When you have a shot, make it count." She nodded. Her father's ghost taught her the geography of patience. Breathe before moving, and when you move, be decisive. As the hours dwindled, Chandler slid a laptop toward Alex. "We've booked the room directly below Raman's suite. Passive ops only. No active transmissions until we need them. You'll have eyes in the ceiling and audio. I can get a feed to your earpiece, but only short bursts." Alex watched the grainy footage of a room below a room. They saw the ceiling tile, the wire mesh, an air duct that hummed faintly with the building's life. It felt obscene to watch a man breathe unknown to him, but they were at war with a monster who dressed himself in legitimate graves. "You ready for the moral part?" Mackenzie asked later, sitting with her under a sky she used to map with her father. If we take him alive, he'll scream, he'll lie, he'll try to sow doubt into the fabric of everything you believe. If we kill him, we lose the best weapon we have: proof. Alex remembered the photograph she'd seen in the Condor file, her father's face half hidden in sun and mud, a younger Victor Harmon grinning in the background. Proof mattered more than vengeance. She had learned early that truth was the only currency that unpicked corruption. We bring him in. We make it public. Jackson's hand found hers briefly, a pressure that didn't need words. For James, he said. The words were small and enormous. At night they prepared gear: silenced pistols, subsonic ammo, lock picks, an old, battered 1911 that once belonged to her father tucked into a padded case. Mackenzie's crew replaced the hotel keycards with forgeries. Chandler simulated maintenance staff with resumes and schedules, and Rivera practiced moving through service elevators while whispering a curse under his breath. Fear became muscle, and muscle became method. Alex had a moment alone on the patio, the desert air cool like linen. She held her father's photograph and let memory do its slow work. She thought of being a little girl on the range, his hand steadying her elbow, correcting the way she indexed her breath. "Don't be afraid of what you do," he would say. "Be afraid of what you don't do." She had tried to live a life that honored that advice, a life of analysis and quiet competence. But now the silence around her was full of the things she couldn't ignore. Justice had a new shape in her mind. It did not trumpet itself. It moved like a shadow and landed where it was needed. The moral questions threaded their way into the team's conversations, soft as dust but persistent. Rivera asked, "How much does one life justify the burning down of a structure?" Chandler replied, "How many structures are already burning because of one life?" The argument had no winner, only gravity. Morning came. They split into their roles with the efficiency of people who had rehearsed for this moment in their heads 1,000 times. Alex slipped into a maintenance uniform, covered her hair, palmed a forged badge, and walked through the hotel's back doors as though she belonged there. The corridors smelled of detergent and tired carpets. She moved with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being unseen. Her earpiece buzzed. Chandler's voice was a whisper. "Nesta Hawk, cameras in place, 2 tangos now in the suite, ramen inbound midday." She let the sound of her breath steady her. Beneath the false floor of her calm, something like joy uncoiled, not the joy of revenge, but the joy of purpose. Her hands were steady now. She had trained for this life in the spaces between childhood and war. Every muscle remembered a lesson. As she climbed the service stairwell to the 13th floor, Jackson's silhouette appeared below, a shadow inside a shadow. Diaz followed, quiet and focused. Rivera and Mackenzie took the stair access closer to the service elevator. Chandler and Wilson were in the room beneath, hooking the ceiling and monitoring every whisper. Zahir, with his hands folded like a man waiting for judgment, stayed at Mackenzie's safe house to coordinate and watch for surprises. They synchronized their watches, a ritual. Alex felt the seconds fall like beads. They practiced the entry again in miniature, mapping movements in the air. A dozen contingency plans lived behind her eyes, each a small door to open if the world turned the wrong way. They had control here, a fragile domino stack balanced on the tip of a truth no one else wanted exposed. The stakes felt older than politics. They felt like the bones of a country. She stepped onto the 14th floor, the carpet muffling her steps. The hallway was empty, the doors humming with ordinary life. There was an odd calm to a hotel at this hour, a peace made of strangers sleeping and lights dimmed. It felt wrong, their war in a place where people came to escape their own. She tightened her grip on the forged badge and let her face become blank. Chandler whispered in her ear, "Now." They moved. Alex's heart beat with the rhythm her father taught her, steady, measured. The suite door was a small, ordinary thing, a hinge and a lock and the difference between history and a lie. She slid the tool into the seam and listened for the click. First lock yielded. The second took patience. The third surrendered like a defeated thing. The door opened onto a space that smelled faintly of cologne and money. The suite was a map of calculated comfort, plush chairs, glass coffee table, a view that looked over the city like a crown. Two men in dark suits were bent in conversation near a table. A third man, not yet their ramen but a courier perhaps, moved to the window. Cameras caught it all, Chandler's soft voice filling Alex's ear with details. 3 targets, 4 moves, 1 truth. She felt the room tilt, not from fear, but from the gravitational pull of all the bodies that had brought her here. She took a breath. Somewhere in the building, a vote was being cast for a future that could be bought. Somewhere else, men who wore patriotism like a cloak were sharpening knives. She had a choice. Let the quiet prevail or make it loud enough to wake a nation. Her hand closed on the handle. The world narrowed to the single motion between action and consequence. What did he whisper right before the world split open? The door cracked. Air moved. Light hit the carpet like a lie being exposed. For a breath, one breath, the suite was ordinary. A glass of water on a table, the hum of an air conditioner, a view of the city that pretended not to belong to violence. Then the click of a latch, the soft sound of a body pivoting. Alex moved first. Years of training made the movement small, deliberate. A footstep, a press of the shoulder, silence. Her gloved hand brushed a man's back and the world shrank to the hiss of her breath in her own ear. 2 figures bent over paperwork at the table. One rose like a puppet whose strings had been cut. The second didn't move fast enough. A soft hand at the base of the skull. He went down without sound. Chandler's feed whispered in her ear, 3 in suite, 1 in the hallway. Cameras show a courier on the terrace, 2 exits. Jackson slid through behind her, that old steadiness folding around her like armor. Diaz covered the door. His presence was a wall you could rely on. Rivera blocked the stairwell. Mackenzie and his team were in the stairwell like ghosts in the walls, moving with a practiced calm that made the hotel seem smaller to the bad things inside it. Alex had a gun, she had a plan. She also had a memory of her father, sharp and private, telling her to look for the small tell that gives the game away. A twitch, a breath, a cigarette blackened at the corner of a mouth. It had been why she noticed the courier's hands. They were too clean, too careful. He was used to being watched. He was not the primary target. Raman was. They closed. Diaz opened the terrace door and the night air washed in. The courier froze when Alex stepped into the balcony. Before he could pull, Diaz had his wrist. A split second, a cuff. Chandler's camera picked up another shadow moving in the hall, a suit that had not been there in the feed a second ago. Mackenzie swore softly. A guard had shifted positions faster than the cameras could catch. Someone upstairs had eyes on them, maybe a tech, maybe something worse. Alex's throat tightened. Anxiety tasted like metal. She could feel it, but it didn't slow her, it focused her. Jackson signaled. They moved, silent as the space between heartbeats. 2 blows, 2 takedowns. They were inside. Raman sat like a man who had never been surprised. He rose slowly from a leather chair, hands raised in a gesture meant to be both surrender and challenge. He was older than the photo suggested, his beard a field of white, eyes like a man who had learned how to bargain with souls. He smiled, slow and practiced. "So they send the children," he said in a voice that smelled of money and old wars. Alex looked at him. "You're under arrest." Her voice measured, firm. She had rehearsed it. She had imagined his fear. She had not expected his pity. He laughed once, a thin sound. "Arrest? For what?" "Selling chaos to those who can afford it, for making the world safer for men like Harmon." He leaned forward. "You want a confession, you want proof. I can make it simple." Jackson's hand tightened on a strap of the restraining harness he'd brought. "We need him alive." His voice had the old iron in it. "You talk, we prove. You die, we bury a secret." Raman's smile didn't falter. "Secrets are living things. You can bury them, but they burrow, they breed." He scanned Alex, then Bull, then the room like a man counting coins. "Your father left footprints, little girl. You follow them like a hound." He said little, like it was a kindness and an insult at once. Alex's pulse thudded, pride and a sad hollow braided together. She felt fierce. She felt like a child stealing fire. She felt broken in a way no wound could measure. "If you lied about him," she said softly, "I will burn what's left of you to ash." He leaned back. "You don't know the whole story." His eyes slid to the window as if the skyline could answer questions. "You won't until you hear the words I will never speak in public." Chandler's whisper crackled, acoustic sensors picking up faint, and then the feed stuttered. A high, sterile tone cut like glass. Her voice snapped into static before dying. The jammer they'd trusted, the small, elegant loop of tech meant to keep unwanted signals from breathing, hiccuped and failed. For a moment it was like being naked in a storm. "Counter-jammer," Sarah hissed over the line. "They've got hard spectrum suppression, it's bleeding through. I can't hold comms for long." Something cold slid through Alex's ribs. Raman had prepared for this. He had not been careless. He was not a barbarian, he was a planner. He had resources and men and the kind of patience that made tragedies neat. The sound alarmed the building. A tone. A light on the suite's phone pad blinked a furious red. Someone somewhere had triggered an internal alert. The room tilted from silence to noise in a fragmented second. Footsteps pounded in the corridor. The courier on the terrace, previously cuffed, had been shouting, probably because a second cuff had clipped him wrong. The hotel security system began doing what hotel systems do: call the wrong people first. A clerk downstairs would make a nervous call. A private security contractor would double-check codes. Someone with Harmon ties would hear a rumor and start moving with bad intent. "Get him," Mackenzie's voice snapped. "We get him and we go, now." They moved as if acted by the same breath. Jackson shoved a gag into Raman's mouth. Alex secured the cuffs and fitted the device to his wrist, a simple restraint that would keep his hand from fumbling for a weapon. Diaz jammed a small package of suppressants in the room's HVAC, while Rivera blocked the stairwell. The hotel that had been a theater of comfort turned into a stage of raw survival. The hallway filled with men, not just the hotel's security, people with posture and bearing, men who had been taught to kill precisely and with conscience removed. Raman's private detail arrived like the closing of a fist. Steel glinted, voices called in accented English. They moved fast, professional. The world narrowed to the moment between a trigger and its echo. Alex's training, her father's training, told her what to do. "Don't be a target, move the target." Jackson screamed an order and Mackenzie's team answered like wind. Rivera engaged, throwing his weight against a door to buy seconds. Diaz laid a controlled burst that forced two men back into cover. Shots cracked. Not many. Precision. The sound was close and acidic. One of Raman's men went down under Jackson's old-fashioned efficiency, a movement with the knife, a hand that had not forgotten war. Another fired, the round punching through a lamp and sending glass like rain. Rivera cried out as a flash caught him in the shoulder, his face crumpling. He was down. Alex saw him fall, and for a moment the world compressed to a pinpoint of white-hot decision. She smelled blood and fear and the small, bright dignity of men who took hits for people they barely loved. Consumed by a fury older than grief, she found a man with his back to a mirrored wall and stepped through the space like a blade. She shot once. He folded. Then again. She felt nothing but cold focus and the mechanical recoil. She was proud. She was ashamed. She was alive. They reached the service elevator on a pray-and push schedule. Rivera was bleeding. His pain made the room spin. Mackenzie strapped him to a collapsible, eyes stormy. Chandler's hands trembled over a laptop, pulling every trace she could before a rigorous sweep scrubbed the hotel's black boxes clean. The jammer re-engaged in fits and bursts. They had minutes, maybe less. Outside, the city moved on like the world owed them nothing. Below, people sipped coffee, checked emails, missed the sound of a man being unmade. It was obscene. It was a mercy. It was the truth. They hustled Raman into the back of a nondescript van. He stared at Alex as they shoved him in. His eyes were ice. "You will learn," he said to her as the doors closed, voice muffled. "Condor never died. It evolved. Men like Harmon buy the shells. Men like me provide the fire. You think you can expose a design. You cannot. You can only delay it. Her hands shook as she climbed into the driver's seat. The device in her pocket, Zahir's thumb drive, felt like a stone. Heavy, important, dangerous. She thought of her father's picture and the glint of his silver star. She thought of Rodriguez and Rivera and the men who would wake wounded. She thought of the country they were trying to free from its own villains. They moved through backstreets toward the botanical gardens. Chandler's voice came back in broken bursts, giving route changes and nodding the arrival of curious vehicles that might belong to Harmon's people. Mackenzie's private team took point. Jackson rode shotgun, his face white with exertion. Rivera was stable in the back with a field bandage. The van swallowed them and spat them back into the world. Sirens screamed in the distance, not for them yet, but for someone. A car flashed past with the wrong kind of urgency, men in dark suits with faces like alarms. Alex kept the van steady. Her hands were steady. Her chest felt like the hollowed-out room in her father's house where someone shelved a rifle and called it peace. They reached the gardens and met Mackenzie's other vehicles, milling like moths around a lamp. Mackenzie met them with quiet fury. "Get the device to a secure outlet," he ordered. "Now." They moved like dreary actors finishing a scene. Chandler handed Alex a clipboard with a list of contacts, names of journalists, some who were incorruptible, others who had to be pushed but could be trusted to publish without taking the bribe. Alex read a few names, felt a small spark of hope. Proof could change the calculus of power. Proof could make a president crumble. Proof could make men uncomfortable in their chairs. Raman, in the van, watched them with the patience of a man who thinks in decades. "You act as if you will win," he said. "Power built this way doesn't fall because you have facts. It falls because men with truth make it fall." Jackson answered for her without turning his head. "Then we will make it fall." Alex felt something fierce and fragile coiled in her chest, determination, pride, hope jagged and bright. She wanted to scream. She wanted to forge a new world from the wreckage of the old. Outside, the city breathed. Inside, the plan bent but did not break. Rivera's wound would be stitched. Chandler would find a channel to carry the files. Mackenzie would move the witnesses. Zahir would watch for shadows. And Alex would hold the stone in her pocket like a promise. As they split into the night, the truth tucked into a drive no larger than a thumb. The thing Raman had whispered slithered at the edge of her hearing. Condor never died. She would make sure it did not live comfortably again. How do you make a country look at its own blood? They brought Raman into a house that knew how to be quiet. Mackenzie's safe house in Scottsdale held the smell of bleach and old plans, the kind of place men retired from war used to keep living things from bleeding into public view. Chandler set up in the garage like a surgeon prepping for a long operation. Routers, decoys, encrypted pipes, a dusty satellite uplink someone had the foresight to keep off-grid. The thumb drive Zahir had given Alex sat on the table like a promise, its weight small but absolute in the palm of a hand. The first thing they did was chain the truth to a chain of custody. It was boring work. Manifests, timestamps, verification hashes, a camera that logged every hand that touched the device. In her old life, Alex wrote reports for judges and commanders who treated proof as a pathway, not a weapon. Now proof was the only thing standing between a conspiracy and a coronation. She watched Chandler checkums and recalculations like a priest watching rosary beads. The lawyer on Mackenzie's team, quiet, sharp, with a face like a folded map, told them what they already knew. They had to be meticulous. Any break in the chain and Harmon would claim fabrication. Any shred of doubt and the truth dissolved into opinion. Raman sat on a metal chair in the living room. He watched them like a man observing ants. He wore the arrogance of someone who'd traded in blood long enough to forget what it cost. Alex wanted to hate him. She wanted to split him open with questions until his bones showed. Instead, she felt the old calculus, alive or dead, what would serve justice. Her father had chosen proof. She would too. Talk, she said, watching the small movements that gave people away. The timbre of his voice, the way his fingers folded. He smiled, patient and bored. You come for the ghost, he said, voice like river stones. Your father had ambitions beyond his pay grade. Why him? Alex asked. Condor, the crash. Why did you let him live and then kill him? Ramon's eyes were an ocean of calm. Because there are sacrifices you make to build an order. Your father was a man who believed in a certain kind of purity. He stepped outside it. He became inconvenient. The line between utility and liability is thin. How many lines have you crossed for Harmon? She demanded. How do you sleep? By convincing myself the world needs order, Ramon said. Your senator wanted chaos managed. I offered him a broom. Jackson stood, the old anger sparking like a short in a wire. You killed 8 men and told the families it was a crash. You made your puppet climb and applaud as the stage burned. Why? Ramon shrugged. Because politics is a market. Some buy with gold, some buy with fear. Harmon bought both. Zahir leaned forward. You were our asset. We trained you. We fed you. You learned early that the state can be bought by those who command the narrative. He spat the last word like a curse. And then you sold it back. They argued, they pressed. They recorded every breath. Chandler streamed some of the transcript live into secure vaults, encrypted copies sent to multiple dead-letter addresses, journalists, NGOs, foreign outlets that couldn't be stopped by Harmon's lawyers overnight. The plan was redundancy. Enough credible witnesses and channels that seizing one node wouldn't bury the tree. Then they found out how deep the reach was. Chandler's face went white. They're suppressing the uplink, she said. Hard spectrum suppression, not just jamming. Someone got a device near our feed points. I see packet loss, then black holes in the traffic. Is there a workaround? Alex asked. We can route through satellites, but those are traceable. They'll triangulate us and come before the data propagates. Chandler's fingers flew. I can fragment the file, send pieces out through multiple channels, but if I start, it's all or nothing. Mackenzie swallowed. If they can jam an uplink, they have assets in tech infrastructure. This is bigger than a senator with friends. This is institutional. A knock at the door cut the room in half. Wilson looked toward the sound, his shoulders tightened. Someone outside. They moved like a single body. Mackenzie poised with a glance, Jackson to the door, Alex at the narrow hallway with a gun against her ribs like a vow. When Jackson opened the door, 2 men in suits stood there, official, calm, badges inside their jackets. Federal. The kind of people who arrive with paperwork and the authority of systems that swallow the bodies of truth. Colonel Mackenzie, one asked politely. We have an order to take custody of Omar Ramon. There's a federal warrant. Mackenzie's jaw went tight. On what grounds? The man presented a folder, crisp and clinical. National security. The department has jurisdiction due to cross-border charges. We'll take him to secure custody. There will be a chance to present evidence. Jackson's eyes did not blink. Or you take him someplace Harmon's people can massage the truth. They both felt it, the tilt of the room toward legal theater. If Ramsey went into federal custody, Harmon's allies could smooth the edges. Evidence could be frozen. Files could be lost in bureaucracy. Ramon could be put under protective custody where he'd be cut off, coached, and then used in a controlled release that served the senator. The thought made Alex's skin crawl. Where's the warrant from? Mackenzie asked. Office of National Security, the man said, signed at the request of the Attorney General. The name landed like ice. Alex's mouth went dry. The Attorney General had ties, public and private, to Harmon's committee. This was not routine federal authority. This was leverage. We'll cooperate, Mackenzie said slowly. But not until we verify chain of custody and ensure an independent prosecutor signs on. The man smiled thinly. We can expedite. Alex could feel the air in the house compressing. This man would go. The file was in her pocket. its hash verified by Chandler's checks. If Raman was seized and the drive seized separately by a penned-off legal team, Harmon had everything he needed to spin. She made a decision that fractured the room into before and after. "We don't trust you," she said. "You can give us a warrant and wait outside while we contact an independent judiciary monitor, or we proceed now to make this public." The man kept his smile a practiced thing. "We'll need to take the subject. Please stand aside." Jackson moved like a man unready to accept fate. "You sign that paper and we die by process," he said. "We don't let that happen." There was shouting then, words like legalese and threats. Zahir stepped forward, voice flat. "If you take him, talk to the press or he is silenced. If you leave him here, he talks. The choice is yours." The federal agent's radio buzzed. He read a message and his expression changed from sunny to stone. "We have orders to seize the drive as well," he said. "Field command instructs so." For a second they all hung there, the room filled with the hollow clicking of gears someone else had set in motion. Raman looked at Alex with a thin smile like a man who knew the script already. "You can't make a country wake without killing its dreamers," he said. "You can't force the dawn without burning sleep." Alex's anger was a living thing now. She thought of Rodriguez's burned hands, of the canyon, of the men she had lost. She thought of a country that preferred tidy stories over messy truth. "If they take him," she said, voice cold, "they will file him away and never let a camera in. The records will be sealed. You know that. You know how to do that." Mackenzie closed his eyes for a long second. "We need a channel they can't jam, and we need it now. Chandler, what's our best shot?" Chandler's face was a map of exhaustion. "We can do a distributed handoff. Physical transfer to multiple independent media outlets at once. Print them copies, give them verified hashes, and get Raman's signed affidavit recorded in multiple places. If they seize one, others survive." "Logistics?" Mackenzie asked. "We need at least 3 physical couriers, 2 satellite uplinks as redundancy, legal protection for the handoff. We have 4 hours before the department mobilizes a proper detail." The room turned into a hive of motion. Mackenzie drew roots. Chandler split the file into encrypted shards and seeded them with verifiable hashes going to journalists in New York, Washington, and an international outlet in Berlin. Mackenzie's firm provided couriers, former operators who could move like ghosts in daylight. Jackson would escort 1 shard, Alex another. The rest would be driven by Mackenzie's team. "Where do we send Raman?" Jackson asked. "To another safe house," Mackenzie said. "One of ours out of state. We move him now before they come back with a warrant that's harder to stall." They moved fast. Every person touching the file logged itself on video. The attorneys printed manifests and notarized statements. They signed affidavits in triplicate, gave them to clerks under the name of a reputable independent NGO. Proof stacked like armor. And still, when Alex stepped out to the van, the world felt thinner. She was escorting one of the shards herself, the drive tucked into a nondescript case. Jackson fell into the passenger seat. "You sure?" he asked. She turned the key in the ignition. "I'm sure." They drove to a courier rendezvous point near the highway where Mackenzie's men were staging. The sun slipped low, and the air tasted like metal, the promise of rain or rust. A black SUV idled at the junction. 2 men climbed out, faces familiar, seconds counted like breath. Mackenzie handed off the manifest. Jackson disappeared into a tuck of shade to speak quiet with the courier. Then shots rang out. They were not massive, precise. Semi-automatic pops that cracked the air like bone. One of Mackenzie's men fell, a neat dark flower blooming against his chest, and then another. The timing was surgical, a suppression shot to create chaos and a path for capture. Someone had known the rendezvous. The room erupted into motion, men running, commands shouted into radios that spat anxiety and static. Alex felt a cold clarity. They'd been betrayed. Someone in Mackenzie's circle had been bought or broken, or Harmon had a mole in the highway patrol. The world narrowed to movement and reflex. She should have felt panic. Instead, she felt a single, steady thing: duty. They fought like men with years of practice. Jackson hauled one of the wounded into the van. Alex reloaded and covered the retreat. The drive shard was in her palm like a hot coal. They moved faster than the bullets, the road throwing them forward into a dark that was not yet safe. At the back of her mind, a small, clear voice whispered, "You wanted justice. Justice is never clean. It gets blood on your hands and dust in your mouth." They didn't lose the file. They lost innocence. They gained the knowledge that truth, when it was sharp enough to pierce the sky, made everyone who touched it a target. As they sped away, the city lights closing behind them like a lid, Alex pressed her forehead to the steering wheel and let herself breathe for the first time in days. She was terrified, furious, and more determined than she had ever been. "We'll make them look," Jackson said softly beside her. "We'll make them see." She closed her eyes and let the dark answer. The stone in her pocket ached, small, heavy, impossible to forget. Outside, somewhere in the city, an agent turned his phone over and read a message that made him tighten his mouth. A man in a senator's office sharpened his words to a file. Men in tailored suits started to move like hunters. They had hours left, maybe less. But the device, the shards, Raman in custody, the witnesses, the manifests, they had begun a chain that could not be unknot. Alex started the engine. They drove into the night toward the next move. Why do people cheer for the sound of thunder until it hits their own roof? The city moved like a sleeping animal, lights blinking, taxis carving silent wounds through wet streets, a million small lives unfurling without knowing how close a giant's hand hovered. Alex drove with the restlessness of someone who'd swallowed lightning. The shard in her case weighed the same as the future she had chosen. Its files, its hashes, its recorded names. They were small enough to fit in a pocket and big enough to topple men. They laid low for a few hours at a motel off the interstate, windows shrouded, engines cool, minds working through the next scene. Rivera's shoulder had been bandaged in the back of the van. He slept in fits and starts, a veteran's dreaming. Chandler traced network paths until her eyes blurred. Mackenzie called old favors and counted men who could be trusted with a life and a secret. Jackson stared out the window at the city and said a name without looking at anyone: Rodriguez, then turned away as if the word itself had burned him. "We need proof on every platform," Chandler said softly, rubbing her temples. She'd cobbled a spiderweb of outlets, a list of journalists who still chased truth like a habit rather than a career move. If Harmon tries to bury it legally, it won't matter if 3 international outlets have the shards and a verified affidavit. We force the story into motion, let the public decide. Alex wanted to believe that would be enough. She wanted to believe in the neatness of law, in the idea that facts, once aired, could not be bought. But fear had taught her otherwise. She saw how a man with power could tilt courts and phones and men until the truth looked like a rumor. She knew she had to force the moment where public light met private rot. Mackenzie's plan was a scalpel. Hit Raman's command post, the suite on the 14th floor had been both altar and office, and cut the head off the operation before the rally. Capture, extract, air. Alex slept for an hour and woke with the bones of a plan already sharp in her head. They would need access, visual confirmation, and a way to make their capture unavoidable without turning the convention center into a battlefield. They rehearsed in the motel parking lot like dancers before a final curtain. Rivera and 2 of Mackenzie's men moved through patterns of entry. Jackson and Alex reworked the timing of the van drop. Chandler rehearsed a burst upload sequence, a brittle watch thing that would get a single verified file out through a satellite link that had never been on any registry. Zahir, who'd been quiet since they'd left the safe house, kept to a corner and spoke only when his voice mattered. "I have men inside the city who owe me death or favor," he said. "Some of them will help for nothing, others need convincing." Alex thought of debts, hers and others. Her father had been paid in trust and silence. She intended to pay him back in truth and exposure. At noon, they moved east toward the city's convention center. Harmon's rally had been advertised as a show of strength, a chorus of flags and slogans. It was also choreography, security positions, entrances, camera placements. Zaher's intelligence painted a skeleton of the operation, where smoke devices would go, which ducts would broadcast the alarms, how the planted operatives would move through a scripted confusion. The plan relied on one ugly truth: public panic could be manufactured as easily as a fireworks display. Jackson gripped the steering wheel like a man holding a raft together. "We cut the head off," he said. "We take Raman out of the equation and hand the files to people who will publish before Harmon's team can snatch them. We make the narrative faster than the lie." "Faster than a lie," Alex repeated. It had the shape of a prayer. They split into shadows. Chandler and Wilson took a suite near the convention center's service entrance to watch feeds. Mackenzie and Rivera worked perimeter access. Alex and Jackson took a van to an old parking structure 2 blocks away. They would approach the Westin, the hotel where Raman's command post was, from a different vector. Zaher would be a ghost in the comms, a voice in the dark. Alex felt the city like a throat narrowing. People moved, suitcases, briefcases, lanyards, unaware of the calculus about to unfold behind the noise. She found herself thinking about the people who cheered at rallies, how their applause could be borrowed by a script and then used to burn a democracy. The thought made her sick. At 1400, Alex and Jackson were in position across from the Westin, the tower reflecting a bright blue sky. They watched people move like the tide and waited for the cue. Chandler's voice came through the earpiece, clipped. "Nesta Hawk, cameras show 4 tangos at the hotel. Raman is in the suite. 2 accomplices on rotation. Technical staff in place." Alex tightened her jaw. "Go dark until we move." They entered the Westin as ordinary guests, borrowed identities sliding over their shoulders. The maintenance card got them to the 13th floor service corridor. They moved with the slow precision of people who knew how to make small noises count as none. Jackson at her back was steady as gravity. His presence steadied the nervousness in her hands. At 1545, Chandler called. "Hawk Nest. Primary plan. Raman will be pulled from his suite to confirm a false alarm at the convention center. That's when they'll move him. We intercept at the command post before the move. You have a 10-minute window." 10 minutes was a razor. They went up. The service lift smelled like industrial cleaner. The corridor to the 14th floor was familiar now. They'd walked it days ago. Rivera's team had already neutralized 2 guards earlier that morning in a quiet rooftop maneuver where the men didn't know they were in danger until it was too late. That had been the plan: distraction, surgical sweep, and then the handoff. But life on the edge of conspiracy never obeyed plans for long. As they stepped into the hallway outside the suite, a figure turned, not a guard, but a technician with a toolkit. His eyes widened as if surprised to find people in uniforms. Then, without warning, a shot cracked from the end of the corridor, a rebound of violence that made the world fold for an instant. People fell into rehearsed positions. Alex moved first, instinct knitting with muscle. A man in a white shirt slumped the technician. Someone else screamed 2 floors down. A security alert had gone live. The hotel's internal systems were buzzing like angry bees. "Compromised," Jackson hissed. "Go." They slammed through the suite door. The scene inside was scrambled, not the neat order they'd hoped for. Raman stood with 2 men, surprised at the intrusion. One of his guards reached for a sidearm, and a single, surgical shot from Diaz placed by the stairwell ripped his movement in half. The room erupted. Sound swallowed them. A voice on the comm barked. "Hawk Nest, we've been hit. Multiple intrusions on the lower approach. Backup moving." Chandler's voice trembled for a second. Alex could hear the strain. "I'm fragmenting the upload now. If you secure Raman, push the handoff. We only get 1 full pass." Alex felt the tunnel in her chest deepen. The world narrowed to bones and reaction. They moved like shadows around furniture and glass. Jackson brought Raman to the ground with practiced hands, clamps and binds, and a gag. Raman's eyes flashed not with fear but amusement. He seemed bored by the spectacle, as if the theater of violence had always been his profession. "You are very noisy," he said in a soft voice. "It displeases me." The problem was not getting him. The problem was leaving with him with the files, while every man who could be bought or blackmailed or tapped was answering a call somewhere in Harmon's machine. They moved Ram into a service stairwell and prepared to go. Then the floor trembled with the sound of authority. Armored SUVs didn't so much arrive as announce themselves. Men in black with the air of federal procedure flooded the lobby entrances. News vans began to ring the perimeter like a crown of hornets. A camera on a balcony caught a scene nowhere near their press plan. Harmon's security, trained and tight, were already sweeping positions. They'd been faster than they were. Jackson swore under his breath. "They've moved resources. Someone in the city tipped them. We're walking into a net." Chandler's voice came through, thin and urgent. "I've opened one fragment path. Berlin's receiving part 2. New York has shard 3. Washington's got shard 1. But their legal team has warned contacts. They'll move fast to contain. If you get Raman out, push the physical copies to the couriers now and extract to the gardens." They did it at breakneck speed. Raman secured, one of Mackenzie's men riding shotgun with the van, Alex at the wheel, Jackson and Rivera pinned to the sides. They moved through alleys like ghosts. Each block peeled them further from the center of the storm. They dumped the first courier at a bookstore 2 miles out, the second at a bakery with cameras that couldn't be shut off. Each handoff felt like a prayer tossed into the night. As they drove, Alex felt the city split into 2 realities, people cheering and people fighting, and she hated the cheer. She hated the way patriotism could be manufactured and sold. She hated the way men like Harmon convinced crowds they were protecting them while they sold the country. In the backseat, Raman was a quiet animal, watching the city scroll past. He spoke softly, as if offering a final lesson. "You think you will expose me and nothing will happen," he said. "You think systems built for order will yield to truth. They will not. They will bury you and then call it closure." Alex thought of the canyon, of the men she'd lost, of the years her father had spent on the wrong side of honesty. "We'll see who gets buried," she said. Her voice was a thin thread of steel. They hit the botanical gardens just as dusk turned the sky bruised and purple. Mackenzie's team met them, hawk-eyed and flat-faced. Chandler's transmissions were a staccato of success and warning. "Shards are seeding. International has 2. Domestic outlets hold copies. We have a live feed queued if you authorize." Alex thought of what live meant. It meant witnesses and leverage. It meant the whole country watching as shutters went up in Harmon's office, and men in suits ran like anyone else trying to hide a fever. She nodded. "Do it." Chandler opened the feed. It was a small thing, a window, but it was a faucet. The shards began to flow back together like streams forced into a river. Within minutes, the first outlet ran a headline that felt like a bell. "Corruption ties Senator Victor Harmon to covert operations. Evidence suggests false flag planned." The city paused. The rally staggered. Cameras pivoted. Phones lit up. The hand that reached for power found, suddenly, yet another hand holding a mirror. And then the cheering began to crack. People who had come for patriotism found themselves staring at footage that suggested their leaders had been selling danger for votes. Confusion spread. Hashtags bloomed. Anchors whispered into cameras with the same mixture of awe and dread. But the net tightened too. Men in dark suits moved faster now, not to silence the files that ship had perhaps sailed, but to control the narrative. Lawyers called producers. Channels that had long-standing favors considered the cost of airing a story that would make men with money tremble. Alex watched it all and felt a strange, hollow victory. They had done what they could. They'd cut ahead, they'd plant the seed. But Raman's last smugness haunted her. Institutions could slow truth, reroute it, and make it look like noise. Public light, Jackson said softly. Let it do the job, let the country decide. She hoped he was right. The moral of the fight felt messy and human. She had not won anything clean. Justice wasn't a single shot. It was 1,000 small agonies and 1,000 small acts of courage. But for the first time since her father's crash, a truth was breathing air in public. They watched the city change color under an uncertain sky. Somewhere, men who had planned a fevered dream were recalculating. Somewhere, yet another betrayal waited. The battle was not over. It had simply moved to a different field. Courts, headlines, the slow churn of everyday opinion. Alex put her hands on the steering wheel and let herself feel the weight of the night. She had her father's pistol, a drive with names, a man in custody, and allies who had bled with her. She also had something else, a small, stubborn belief that sometimes consequences could be crafted by truth. The rally had been a planned thunderclap meant to lift a man to power through fear. They had stolen the Thunder's script and read it aloud before it could be staged. That would not stop men from making storms, but it might make them think twice about who they asked to light the fuse. They drove into the dark, the city behind them glowing like oxygen. There would be hearings and coups of PR and maybe worse. But right now, the files were out. The evidence existed in more than one place and people were talking. Alex let out a breath she hadn't known she'd been holding. It trembled, like the first note of a song that might end in mourning or in mercy. She could not tell which. What do you do when the people you trusted to fix a broken system use that same system to break you? The days that followed the leak felt like running through water. News cycles churned, anchors swallowed words, lawyers sharpened their tongues. The shards Chandler had seeded stitched themselves into articles, then into televised hearings, then into 100 opinion pieces that fought over the same facts until the facts looked ragged. People who'd never thought about covert operations or old wars began to ask what their leaders had done in their names. That was the good part. The bad part moved faster. Men with money moved like predators. Men with law moved like surgeons. Both loved precision. Victor Harmon's camp moved first with the language they knew best, denial and procedure. The senator took the cameras each morning, standing beneath flags and framed photographs of his service. He called for calm, for due process, for respect for institutions. He spoke of patriotism and the dangers of unauthorized leaks. His voice was smooth, rehearsed, the voice of a man who believed the right words could make anything true. At the same moment, the Attorney General, the same office that had almost seized Raman, announced an investigation into the integrity of the files. "We must ensure national security," she said. "We cannot let rogue elements dictate policy." The message was clear. Trust your leaders. Distrust the people who pointed fingers. The machinery of power does not move quietly. It moves like weather, eroding the ground beneath the feet of those who stand exposed. But the leaks had teeth. International outlets ran side-by-side translations of Chandler's shards. Guardians and investigative reporters who had nothing to gain and everything to lose published names and bank transfers and orders. The public conversation changed from rumor to outrage. Protesters gathered where Harmon had planned rallies. His rallies still packed people in like prayer, but now some faces in the crowd carried anger that looked like betrayal. Panic and clarity arrived in the same moment, and for the first time in decades, there were votes being made on something other than slogans. Harmon responded as men in power do, by tightening. He used loyal attorneys to file injunctions, pressured networks with advertisers, and leaned on local officials to arrest the agronomists of his political weather, the small outlets and independent journalists he could intimidate. The playbook was old but effective. The country had laws that could be used as hammers when persuasion failed. They used them. And then they used violence. The first attempt came like a piece of theater designed to terrify. A small explosive in a secondary rally that caused injuries but by design spared the candidate. The image on live TV, smoke, a candidate unharmed amid a shaken crowd, reverberated into the narrative that had been planned for months. The effect was immediate. Fear trumped skepticism. People wanted shelter. They wanted certainty. They wanted someone to stand between them and the chaos. Harmon's handlers crowed about stability. Their message landed because panic corrodes nuance. Chandler's feeds had prepared them for this possibility. The shards were out, but narrative control is a muscle that has been exercised for generations. With each new outrage, the public's attention splintered. The work of proving connection, of showing wires between the smoke and the men in suits, required time. Time was the enemy. They were not passive while time passed. Mackenzie's team built legal schedules and media strategies like a surgeon building a field hospital in enemy territory. Chandler worked through the night to keep the original shards alive in multiple caches. Mackenzie used every contact to secure independent prosecutors and an international watchdog who could not be easily bought. Zahir fed intelligence to teams that would sit on it until an injunction couldn't silence an entire continent. But power has counterweights, and the counterweights moved in shadows. They found the mole in the courier network, not a spy with a leather coat and a coated briefcase, but a man with a mortgage and a sick child who could be bought with favors disguised as help. They found the jurist who owed a favor for a previous campaign donation. They found the Middleville operators who slept in the same bed as loyalty and fear. The conspiracy was not a single villain. It was a net stitched with favors and debts. And then came the thing Alex had always feared most. They came for her. They began small, an SUV following her route home one night, a man with 2 polite questions at the grocery store, little inconveniences that feel like wind until they are hurricane. Then the real strike, a late-night break-in at a storage unit where Mackenzie had prepped evidence copies. The men who took the copies moved like trained professionals. They left very little behind. In the morning, Chandler's checks found gaps in the chain of custody that had been there a minute before and were not there now. Men were arrested for a day, then released. Statements vanished into administrative backwaters. Threats landed in Mackenzie's inbox like guillotines in slow motion. Alex felt the circling of vultures in a way that made her mouth taste metallic. She moved through the days like a woman in armor who had forgotten how to sleep without a rifle across her chest. She stayed on the move, on different routes, different faces. Jackson watched her with a look that was a half apology and a full sorrow. He'd been through this before. Once, decades ago, he'd watched a friend fall into a quiet black hole of accident. He'd come back because someone had to keep the promise of truth. Now that promise blackened. The night the hit came to end them all, they were at Mackenzie's secondary safe house, a low-profile brick home with a ring of cypress and a generator that chugged like someone with a secret. Raman was secured in a locked room under constant watch. The shards were spread across 3 different caches, and Chandler had a live feed ready, a cascade of documents that would publish simultaneously if the house was breached. They'd rehearsed the move like a ritual, the moment of sacrifice, the arch of history, the mechanics of exposure. At 02:13 the door exploded. Not a dramatic movie explosion, but a wet, efficient breach, a charge placed where cinderblock meets mortar. Men with night vision and quiet rifles moved like smoke through the kitchen, favors paid and calls answered. The house jolted. Rivera took the first hit in the thigh, his shout overlapped with the sound of glass. Jackson moved like a man who had been given back 10 more years and decided to spend them all now. He pushed a sprinting intruder and took 2 rounds to the chest. The world narrowed to white for him and black for the intruder. Alex felt the burn of panic, a cold animal clawing upward. She moved with the speed trained into her limbs but with the weight of grief already setting in. Jackson went down, and for a second she was not a soldier but a daughter seeing a father fall. She got to him, ignored the red spreading across his chest because training is a language that tells you what to do before the world fills with sound. She applied a tourniquet, forced words into his ears. He laughed, a small broken sound. "Thought I'd go out in a blaze of glory," he said, breath rasping. "You doin' fine, kid." Tears burned her eyes but did not fall. They do not while someone needs you alive. She shoved a morphine dose into his thigh, but the men who came through the door were not looking for theater. They wanted evidence, and they had people with them who would scrape it. Mackenzie's men fought with a ferocity that left the kitchen littered with bodies and blood. The attackers retreated faster than they arrived, the operation surgical and incomplete. They left a mess of broken locks and a note, the kind of note that looks like a threat but reads like a promise. Silence costs less than truth. Jackson didn't make it. He died with her hand on his wrist, steady and still. His eyes looked at her like a man seeing home. "Finish it," he mouthed, and the sound cracked the air like a vow. She wrapped his name around her like prayer and then turned his body over to men who would give him what the field could not: papers, a marker, a way home. They buried him later with little ceremony and a single flag that seemed inadequate and perfect all at once. Grief reshaped Alex into something harder and more precise. Pain is a teacher that does not suffer foolishness. She grieved, and then she worked. Jackson's death sharpened the edges of her resolve. She did not seek vengeance in the cinematic sense. She sought a different, quieter thing, to make the truth so noisy that men who deal in quiet deals could not sell silence anymore. They rallied. Mackenzie called in every favor not stained by the same hands as the conspiracy. Chandler found a new path, a dead-drop system through a small, independent broadcaster in Berlin, and a cloud of mirrored caches across neutral countries. They published a complete unsealed dossier at dawn: documents, bank records, intercepted comms, and Ramon's recorded confession. The files were raw and ugly, but they were real. Newsrooms that once sat on their hands because of pressure now splashed the documents across their front pages. People read with the same disbelief that comes when a beloved myth unravels. Harmon held a press conference and called it a smear campaign. His allies called for unity. The Attorney General announced an inquiry, this time with international monitors. The net around Harmon tightened like a fist. Men who had been confident in private calls and quiet favors began to whisper instead of shout. The public conversation shifted from fear to accountability. Not everyone believed the files. Not everyone would ever believe. But the mechanism of secrecy had a crack, and through it people could peer. There were hearings and subpoenas and the long, noisy machinery of democracy taking its much-delayed steps. There were compromises and trade-offs and legal wins that felt like small lamp posts being lit along a long, dark road. There was also ugliness: smear campaigns against Zahir, attempts to discredit Chandler's digital methods, and attacks on outlets that refused to fold. Some people lost jobs. Some people lost reputations. Some people lost the comfort of their illusions. Alex stood in a courtroom months later, testimony finished. The camera lights like a confessional. She had not wanted to be a hero. She had wanted the name of the man who killed her father to burn out of the world like an ember. Instead, she had become an instrument in a system that can, at times, work messy, imperfect, painfully slow. She testified not as a warrior thirsting for vengeance, but as a witness to what happens when institutions can be bent toward truth. Her voice was steady. Her hands did not shake. She had a scar above her eyebrow and a man's blood under her nails. She had a long list of friends who would not wake up tomorrow. When it was over, an old reporter asked for a comment. The world wanted a line that sounded like victory. She thought of Rodriguez and Rivera and Jackson. She thought of her father and the lessons he taught her about which fights to pick and which to avoid. She thought of the canyon and the ember of pride that rises when a person knows they did everything they could. She said simply, "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." The camera blinked, the microphones hummed, and somewhere outside the courthouse a crowd murmured as if hearing a truth they had not been taught before. It did not end everything. The trials were long. The politics were sticky. Men who had built their lives on lies still had wealth and lawyers. But something had shifted. The theft of truth was no longer cost-free. Men who once moved in the quiet now had to account for light. She walked away from the courthouse and felt the sun on her face like the end of a long, hard night. She still carried scars and the ache of all she had lost. She had become a woman of action that her father had hoped to raise, but at a cost that left hollow. Hope was not a banner waving in the wind. It was a quiet thing she wore under her jacket, stitched from the memory of a friend who died saving a truth and a father who taught her how to see. She would keep fighting in the ways that mattered: legal proof, public light, slow, stubborn pressure. She had learned that justice is a process, not a pistol. And when she paused, late at night, she found Jackson's face in the pattern of stars he once taught her to read. She whispered his name, and the desert answered soft and patient. The country would do what countries do. It would stumble, mend, and sometimes corrupt itself again. But now when it did, there was at least one story to hold up against it: a scratched thumb drive that began with a photograph of a man who loved his daughter enough to teach her how to finish what he could not. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts.